Tiana's Bayou Adventure is a ride that has been met with a lot of skepticism from a lot of people, and if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I haven't really had many positive things to say about Disney over the past few years. Their attraction design has often felt like slapping popular characters onto half-baked and mediocre rides, and often at the expense of tearing out classics, which corporate leadership had allowed to age into irrelevancy. Now, let me be clear, while I enjoyed Tiana's predecessor, Splash Mountain, from an attraction design standpoint, the film it was based on, Song of the South, was problematic, romanticizing the sharecropping of the Reconstruction era and perpetuating negative stereotypes about African Americans. If you came to this video to try to twist the facts about this film, or use Splash Mountain as a platform to hint at hateful sentiment against others, then I'm going to be straightforward and tell you that I have no tolerance for any of that, and I'll be doing the YouTube equivalent of banning you from the channel. Outside of the problematic source material, Splash Mountain has also unfortunately become a cultural lightning rod, and it's impossible to talk about it without attracting either the awful Save Splash Mountain people, or on the other side, getting accused of holding prejudiced opinions by acknowledging that the ride was really strong in its design. When the replacement of Tiana's was announced, likely because of the events in 2020 that really brought issues of targeted and prejudiced police brutality to the forefront of the American consciousness, there was a lot of surprise and sadness from the park-going community, I think because most people who experienced it just took it at face value as an original park creation. To many, it was a thrilling but cute romp with critters, fun music, and well-detailed, ambitious scenes. Now that this attraction source material was under a magnifying glass, becoming a contentious beacon of cultural criticism, to learn that it was based on Song of the South was conflicting for many, because while they loved the ride, they now had to face the revelation that ignoring its cultural context was problematic. With this in mind, the expectation was that its replacement should be just as good, if not better than the original, and while many people remained optimistic that Disney would do this new version justice, I think there was still a lot of underlying skepticism, as most of what Disney has done past Pandora has either felt cheap or hollow, not really reaching that old Disney standard of excellence that people have always loved about the parks. If the ride turned out badly, it would be impossible to express disappointment without either being appropriated by the Save Splash people, or otherwise being accused of not supporting a new inclusive property, even if the ride had very real design issues. If you've been with me from the earliest days of my channel, then you might recall my first video, which was titled, Why Splash Mountain is Not Getting a Retheme, which essentially made the argument that Disney did not actually care about inclusion and diversity, announcing a fake project that would quietly be cancelled because they were trying to prevent social unrest and protests as they were reopening their parks during the pandemic. I privated the video because obviously Disney turned out to be serious, and to my surprise, actually addressed other problematic depictions in their parks, like replacing certain scenes in the Jungle Cruise. However, the arguments of the video wasn't very clear because it was my first script, and it premiered at the time that the Save Splash crowd was really developing, trying to use me to platform their hate. Anyways, getting back to the point, Tiana's Bayou Adventure was always going to be another cultural lightning rod, and so people waited with caution, hoping that this new ride would feel authentic in its representation, while also living up to the incredible attraction design of the original. It really didn't look like this was going to be the case until I rode it recently, but you know what? It's actually fantastic. I rarely ever get excited to ride new Disney attractions again, but I'm surprised to be looking forward to my next experience. It's not perfect, and there are certainly design issues that I would like to address that really shouldn't be happening, but it somehow manages to capture that feeling of old Disney design that I didn't think was possible from the current company. Tiana's has a really loaded expectation to live up to, so if you were concerned that this was going to be yet another loss from Disney, I'm excited to actually bring positive news for once and really discuss what makes it a worthy successor to the strengths of Splash Mountain. If it's been a while since you've been in the Magic Kingdom, then one of the first changes they're going to notice is just how different the facade is. The old Splash Mountain was iconic with its tree stump framing the drop, where, as the logs plummeted to the bottom, you would see them disappear into the intimidating briar patch. This was a strong first impression of the ride, no doubt, and as a kid, I remember finding the thorns intimidating, imagining something much more terrifying than what was actually down there. While initially, concept art for Tiana's did show Mama Odie's treehouse here instead, the stump was eventually removed, instead framing the mountain with a swamp and a Tiana's Foods water tower. In my opinion, the water tower is a little too tacky for my taste, specifically because of the tiara placed on top, but otherwise, I really enjoy the swamp theme and the new greener hill, which is intended to be a salt mine. In conjunction with the bayou of the indoor scenes, it reminds me quite a bit of the start of Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean and the Blue Bayou restaurant, so I really like the atmosphere that's been put into place. It took me a while to get used to seeing this new version over the Splash Mountain tree stump and briar patch, but now that I've had time to absorb the change, I've realized that I actually think that this looks better. Moving past the Frontierland train station and into the queue itself, you'll notice that the old barn has become the entrance for Tiana's Foods, and moving further into the exterior switchbacks, most of the splash queue and buildings have been recycled, feeling very much like what was there before. To provide context if you haven't seen The Princess and the Frog, Tiana opens her restaurant, Tiana's Palace, at the end of the film, and so I assume that Tiana's Foods is an extension of that business, as this takes place after. It probably explains this once you get inside the building, but I moved through the queue so quickly that I didn't have time to take in the details. The outside area of the queue also plays a radio show that features New Orleans jazz, which, if I can start nitpicking here, does bother me a bit in terms of the theme. While Splash Mountain made sense as part of Critter Country and Disneyland, the Magic Kingdom version was very much a southern themed ride that was painted to be a bit more orange and western looking to fit in right next to Big Thunder Mountain. However, the film takes place in Georgia, and the Brer Rabbit stories vaguely take place somewhere in the American South, so for Tiana's to actually take place in Louisiana near New Orleans, it's definitely a lot further west and more appropriate for the theme of Frontierland. People like to complain that this is still not the frontier, while also ignoring the longtime staple of Tom Sawyer Island, which itself takes place on the Mississippi. If you were not aware, the Mississippi runs through New Orleans and out into the Gulf of Mexico, so in terms of location, Tiana's Bayou Adventure is definitely more fitting for Frontierland thematically. Also, critics of this location seem to have no knowledge of actual American westerns, many of which take place in the South, which is a staple of the genre. This is a bit of a different example, but the critically acclaimed video game Red Dead Redemption 2 notably has many locations in the American South, with one city even based on New Orleans, yet it still clearly qualifies as a western. The issue I have specifically with Tiana's is that the time period feels wrong, as going back to the first Red Dead Redemption, another undeniable classic western game, it actually takes place in 1911, making the point that the Wild West is being tamed into submission and has almost disappeared. I feel that Tiana's does firmly fall outside of the right time period though, as the year is 1927, and so I feel that the radio show is too much of a contemporary reminder that doesn't fit the theme of Frontierland. However, moving into the old Splash Mountain barn, it appears that this is now a storeroom for Tiana's Foods, containing boxes of ingredients and an office that reveals Tiana is catering Mardi Gras in New Orleans and needs to ship the food over. Some technology in here still feels inappropriate for Frontierland, but I otherwise like this space and wish I had more time in here to take in the details. Following the old splash queue and exiting this building, you then move upstairs into the upper floor of Tiana's Foods. Here, there are framed photos and newspaper clippings, which again, I wish I had time to read as they probably tell the story. However, I do like that there are ingredient pantries up here which are well detailed, and in the center, there's a kitchen where beignets are being made. I had heard that there's supposed to be a beignet scent pumped into this area, but I couldn't detect anything if there was. One of the largest issues with converting Splash into Tiana's was the mountain itself, which the ride justifies as being an old salt mine that Tiana purchased. Decide for yourself whether this makes sense to you, but walking along the old tunnels, I enjoyed the stupid puns on the warning signs, and an old alcove from Splash Mountain has been turned into TNT storage, which Tiana seems to have repurposed into another place to store ingredients and sauces. Finally leaving the mine and entering the station, it appears that this is a shipping yard along a river, which leads out into the bayou. A really big issue that I have with current Disney design is that it often lacks detail, which itself often does a lot of environmental storytelling that makes you feel like you are going through real, lived-in spaces. A lot of this can be achieved through set design and placing props thoughtfully, which is something that I really love about Universal Orlando's tribute stores, which, if you were not aware, are seasonal retail locations that are almost attractions in and of themselves. With new Disney design, however, most rides, queues, and lands either just place random junk around without thought, a big issue with Galaxy's Edge, or they instead try to take a sleek, minimalist approach, removing detail completely. Magic Kingdom is full of small areas packed with elements that help sell the atmosphere, and a good example of this is the Frontierland train station, which has the baggage and freight lockup, including fun storytelling moments that contribute to my enjoyment here. What I really like about the queue for Tiana's is that you'll actually find a lot of detail, which itself really helps it feel like a natural extension of Frontierland, time period issues aside. Again, I wish I had more time to spend in here as the queue moved quickly during pass holder previews for the ride, but I would say that this is actually a lot more interesting than the queue for Splash Mountain ever was. Once you board the log and depart from the station, you briefly move through a tunnel where instrumental music from the film tastefully plays, before then making your way up a small lift hill. While there are boxes in detail here that extend the shipping theme, Splash Mountain used to have an animatronic of Brer Frog on the lift, who would start telling the story of Brer Rabbit, so it is unfortunate that there's no story element in this one segment of track for Tiana's. Cresting the hill and splashing into the bayou, you'll encounter two static frogs on your left, and looking past the lush vegetation on your right, you'll see logs dropping and disappearing quickly. I'll definitely say that I miss seeing riders drop into the intimidating thorns of the Briar Patch, and there was a splash effect with water cannons as they disappeared beyond view. While this segment of track in Tiana's is definitely a pleasant vibe, that element of peril is missing, which is actually one of my stronger complaints about the new version. Moving on though, you'll read a banner advertising a party hosted by Tiana, and moving up into what I believe is a gardening shed, you'll encounter a really sophisticated Tiana animatronic that asks you to look out for Lewis so that he can help you search for musicians for the party. What's strange here is that the animatronic speaks directly to your vehicle, and the logs dispatch in pairs of two, often riding pretty close to each other. While I noticed that the dialogue was different on this lift for both logs, Tiana otherwise just stands there awkwardly waiting for you to move up the hill, which is strange. It's not necessarily an issue, but more just a weird quirk that I thought was worth pointing out. Also, while we may have lost Brer Frog, the second lift was otherwise pretty empty before, so I would say that it evens out. Reaching the top, this area is definitely an improvement over Splash, having you move through some of the gardens, and adding moving effects as you witness Lewis searching under a wheelbarrow for some musical critters. In Splash Mountain, this area always felt a bit lifeless as you move through some gardens and houses for the animals, but Tiana's does add that kineticism and a lot more visual interest, while also maintaining the atmosphere of what was here before. Reaching your first drop, you splash down into the bayou to search for your new animal friends, and one of the first scenes you'll encounter is Lewis, who didn't seem to be working when I rode. Traveling forward, you'll encounter scenes with many animatronic critters as Tiana and Lewis recruit them for the party, with many of these scenes separated through long stretches of dark swamp, which includes a tasteful use of screens and lighting effects to surround you with fireflies. A big criticism here is that Disney removed many animatronics and replaced scenes with dark stretches, because while this ride does have many animatronics, which from my count was 46, it doesn't reach the quantity that was Magic Kingdom's version of Splash, which was reportedly 68. I'm sure you've noticed, but a really atrocious trend in current Disney design is blowing a lot of money on a few admittedly good animatronics, but otherwise leaving the rides feeling pretty empty. I've pointed out this issue quite often because I'm of the opinion that long, detailed sets full of animatronics that function with lower movement and are therefore cheaper actually makes for much more interesting and fuller scenes because there's so much to observe, adding a good degree of re-rideability. That was a large part of what made Splash Mountain great, but while yes, there are fewer animatronics in Tiana's, there's actually many more here than Disney will usually commit to, showing that they understand how important populated scenes were to the previous ride. The dark stretches of Bayou are actually rather pretty, atmospheric, and detailed, which blends well with the many scenes that are still in this segment of the building. Do you know what Splash Mountain's greatest strength was though? It was never the quantity of animatronics, many of which really did nothing, but rather the atmosphere, filled with critters and fun music. That's exactly what's happening in Tiana's, that these scenes are really strong, with too many people also forgetting that Splash had its own long stretches of scenes without animatronics as well. Essentially, I'm saying that while it's different in many ways, the strong sense of atmosphere and singing critters is still very much present, and in my opinion, is actually paced quite a bit better than Splash Mountain ever was, so this actually feels like an improvement to me. Many people might counter this and point out that this area of the track had many story elements when it was Splash, but let's not pretend that most people were aware of a story, as the dialogue would often bleed into other scenes, was drowned out by the music, or was just difficult to make out on its own. The strength of Splash was definitely Southern atmosphere, and that's a huge part of what makes this area of Tiana's great as well. As I mentioned earlier, one of my issues with the ride is the lack of peril, as it was very much conceived as a thrill ride, and as you reach the end of the critter searching segment, the next drop is recontextualized. Instead of Brer Rabbit almost getting thrown into a honey trap, you're now asked by Tiana to search for critters high and low, as Louis gets his head stuck in a log, and you move past some more frogs. While I really dislike that this is a screen, you encounter Mama Odie, who magically shrinks you down to frog size as you enter the drop, bringing you into an underground segment. Yes, there are fewer animatronics here, but as you move through the former Laugh-In Place, there's still some good figures and a lot of visual kineticism. Still, I'm of the opinion that this is actually the weakest area of the ride, because I really don't like that there's screens showing Tiana and Louis looking in at you, or otherwise moving past fireflies. These do look better in person than on camera, as they do have a bit more depth, but I'm definitely seeing potential for many improvements here. While I don't think that the quantity of animatronics is necessarily important for a scene to be good, this segment could still definitely use more moving elements and something novel to make it more interesting. For example, instead of the screen with Tiana and Louis, Imagineers could have built actual static figures with Louis' snout protruding into the scene, something that would be on the scale of the giant insert Mickeys, which would feel like a clever, memorable element. On approaching the big drop, another issue for me is again that lack of peril, as the tense music, sinister vultures, and scene of Brer Rabbit tied up and about to be thrown into the stew pot helped set that tense atmosphere, building tension for the now big drop, which again was framed in an intimidating way long before you got on the ride. In Tiana's, you just have another screen with Mama Odie and Juju, as she essentially announces that she's going to inflate you back to normal size. The actual lift has a lot of mist and a neat lighting effect to represent Mama Odie's magic, and as you approach the top, a Mama Odie animatronic shouts that she's going to get you to the party. The drop is the drop, which many park guests will find thrilling, but since there was really no buildup of tension that hung over you through Splash Mountain, it does lack that psychological intensity. Meandering through the outside portion, you eventually make your way back to the show building for the final segment to the party at Tiana's New Orleans mansion. It seems that Imagineering knew that it had big expectations to fill, as Splash's showboat scene was massive and contained many animatronics, with the Magic Kingdom version containing 16, and I think I was able to count 26 in the Disneyland version. However, on my count for Tiana's new finale, the animatronics definitely beat out Magic Kingdom's Old Splash, as this scene contains 21 figures that I could count. The screens in the background do add more kineticism to the scenery as well, which do also blend into the scene better in person. I do miss the epic showboat, but this scene is still very impressive and actually adds more than it took away, at least for the Magic Kingdom. Moving forward, Splash Mountain did have additional scenes with animatronics, but on Tiana's, there are static frogs and a great painting with Tiana's palace in the background. It might be missing some kineticism, but it's wonderfully atmospheric and works for this ride. Reaching the final scene of Splash Mountain, you saw Brer Rabbit lounging and singing after his escape, while Mr. Bluebird sits on his mailbox. In Tiana's, you instead see Mama Odie and Juju as she thanks you for delivering the party, and other than how good the quality of the animatronic is, this scene also pumps the smell of beignets at riders, which is a huge win. Something that I've talked about through many of my videos is that sensory effects are really important in attraction design, and scent can often evoke the most visceral and memorable reactions of people. Splash Mountain did not contain any scents other than the smell of bromine in the water, which by the way is still great to experience again in Tiana's, but to end the experience with beignets makes it truly memorable, solidifying what is already a really strong ride. Before returning to the station, you'll encounter another static figure of a frog, and the wall is papered with flyers advertising the Critter Band, which feels like a fitting bit of detail as you transition back to the station. So, if you were to compare Splash Mountain to Tiana's Bayou Adventure, which of these is the better attraction? Here's the thing. I know that many people will say Splash because they'll get hung up on the number of animatronics, and there were many iconic scenes that have delighted generations of park guests. However, in retrospect, it's becoming clear to me that while Tiana's may have fewer animatronics, many of them are far more interesting in their complexity and are spread out more effectively, filling in many areas which were previously empty. I do have issues with screens in the ride, where I do really think there should be animatronics, especially in the former Laugh and Play scene, but the strengths of the ride are otherwise so strong that I'm willing to forgive this, even if I would have personally wanted to see more physical effects. I do have another negative that I haven't mentioned, which is that the story of the ride is actually pretty stupid, with you just searching for the critters. However, as I mentioned earlier, the story of Splash Mountain was conveyed terribly, and while many critics of Tiana will pretend otherwise, realistically, the majority of people who've been on the ride never knew that there was a story unless they were really into theme parks. Splash Mountain had poorly timed and difficult to hear dialogue that was conveyed at a really quick pace, and so what most people got out of the ride was its atmosphere and dense, detailed scenes. That was Splash Mountain's largest strength, and it's just as good in Tiana's, and while I also missed the build-up and tension of peril, I do think that this is a pretty lateral move in terms of quality. You're always going to have your people who can't let go of the past, or who will continue to champion Splash Mountain because it's a disguise for their malicious prejudices, but if you're someone who loved the ride for its atmosphere and quality, then I'm going to say that, in my opinion, Tiana's Bayou Adventure is absolutely a worthy replacement that feels very similar. Yes, people are definitely nitpicking many elements of it to try to bring it down, but Splash had many glaring issues in its design as well that people are conveniently ignoring. One particular disingenuous nitpick I've seen is that many people point out operational issues with animatronics, which yes, that is disappointing, but the ride is still in its preview stage as of the writing of this video. I should also mention that on my ride through, I was stuck in many block sections, sometimes minutes at a time while waiting to move forward. I believe that when retheming the ride, Disney took the opportunity to install new safety and sensor systems, and so the issues that it's currently experiencing will likely be worked out not too far into the future. Speaking of track modifications, you get significantly wetter than you did previously, with water often splashing into your log and soaking you pretty thoroughly. I know that this is a weird complaint for a water ride, but what I liked about Magic Kingdom Splash Mountain specifically was how little you got wet when compared to the Disneyland version, as I was more interested in the show scenes than actually getting hit with water. Tiana's has many areas where water splashes violently, and the drop even now has sprayers, so if you want to avoid getting soaked, you should probably avoid the first few rows where water now gets dumped into your lap. If you know me and have seen my videos, then you know that I'm pretty critical when it comes to Disney because there really is so much going wrong within the company. When I tell you that this is a good ride though, one that feels satisfying if you loved Splash Mountain, then I really am surprised to say that Disney has a solid win here. It's been a really long time since I've been excited to ride a new Disney attraction a second time, and I think that the company knew it actually had to put money and effort into this, knowing that there were many loaded expectations. So those are my thoughts on Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and while I know I'm going to get many hateful comments calling me a Disney shill or a sellout, which is one of the funniest insults you could throw at me of all people, this was my genuine opinion as someone who really liked Splash Mountain and thought that this new ride was likely going to be awful. If you would like to counter the negativity that this video is likely going to receive, then one way to help me out is to just hit the like button. As always, if you enjoy the videos that I produce, I also recommend hitting the subscribe button with bell notification so as to be alerted to new videos as they release.